Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our third Connect virtual event, Achieving Net Zero by 2050. Today's event focuses on a package of critical bipartisan carbon management policies that are in the 117th Congress. I'm Jessie Stolark, the Public Policy and Member Relations Manager for the Carbon Capture Coalition, which is convened and staffed by today's event host, the Great Plains Institute. I have the pleasure of introducing today's fantastic event, which will feature discussion from federal and state policymakers, businesses that are building the carbon management supply chain, and key experts. As a brief introduction to today's topic, carbon management technologies, which include carbon capture, removal, transport, utilization, and storage, are central to meeting net zero emissions while preserving and creating high-wage jobs. It has been estimated that enacting the portfolio of complementary policies needed to deploy carbon management at the necessary scale could deliver a 13-fold scale-up of carbon management capacity in the United States, and between 210 to 250 million metric tons of annual emissions reductions by 2035. So just to reiterate, it would be a 13-fold increase and 210 to 250 million metric tons of emissions abated. These policies would also lay the groundwork for the creation of hundreds of thousands of jobs in the carbon management industries and billions in investments. Today, we will hear more about building on the cornerstone policy for carbon management development, the 45Q tax credit, through key carbon management provisions in bipartisan legislation and in President Biden's American Jobs Plan. I'm going to now turn to our distinguished guest and opening speaker, Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico. Senator Lujan has been a tireless advocate and leading voice on energy and climate issues in both the U.S. House of Representatives and now serving as the junior senator for the state of New Mexico. In the U.S. House of Representatives, he represented New Mexico's 3rd Congressional District and was the House Assistant Speaker in the 116th Congress. He has a proven track record of working to craft policy that creates good, paying jobs, builds a clean energy economy, and addresses climate change. In addition to serving on a number of key committees, Senator Lujan is also the lead sponsor of the bipartisan Coordinate Action to Capture Harmful Emissions Act, or the CATCH Act, which would eliminate harmful carbon capture thresholds for industry, power, and utilization applications, as well as increasing the credit levels for industrial power and carbon utilization projects. So with that, I'll turn to Senator Lujan.
Well, Jessie, thank you so much for the introduction and for having me today. And really want to acknowledge the work of Secretary Harris and the entire panel of experts. It's good to be with all of you this afternoon. And it's clear that the climate crisis is accelerating. In New Mexico, we've seen increased wildfires, drought, and flooding. And these are all not just unique to New Mexico, but across the West and across America. As you all know, this summer across the West, there were historic fires, droughts, and just 2 weeks ago, Hurricane Ida made landfall, wreaking havoc in communities along its path, spawning deadly tornadoes and causing severe flooding across the Northeast. Hundreds of homes and businesses were ruined, more than 80 lives were lost. And this is just the latest example of real, tangible threats that the climate crisis poses and why there's no time to waste before we act. Now, recent modeling by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the International Energy Association, or agency, underscores the essential importance of widespread deployment of carbon capture and carbon utilization technologies across our economy to achieve net zero emissions. The IPCC and IEA analysis shows that by mid-century, we also need to move CO2 from the atmosphere on a large scale to avoid the worst impacts of a changing climate. So it's for those reasons and several others that I joined my Democratic and Republican colleagues in the Senate to sponsor the CATCH Act in the Senate and co-sponsored other bipartisan legislation to ensure that carbon capture is a significant part of our nation's toolkit for tackling climate change. The CATCH Act would provide an urgently needed boost in the value of 45Q from 50 to 85 per metric ton. Now, this is a critical step in reaching President Biden's goals of net zero in the power sector by 2035. The CATCH Act would also eliminate eligibility thresholds in 45Q that now prevent smaller facilities emerging technologies such as carbon utilization and direct air capture from benefiting from the tax credit. It would also enable clean hydrogen companies to utilize the credit, paving the way for a clean hydrogen economy in places like New Mexico. I believe that we have strong support for these provisions in Congress, and your help and efforts are going to make this a reality. Now, I just want to close by saying we need your help. As you'll see, there's a difference in approach between the House and the Senate. And I think it's important that we continue to advocate for the Catch Act and the provisions that we included in the Senate bill. So definitely look forward to working with you all to make that a reality. And we'll turn this back over to you. Thanks again to the panel for making themselves available, and to each and every one of you for making a difference in every corner of America. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Senator Lujan. We much appreciate it. I'm Patrice Wallum, and I'm a program consultant working with the Great Plains Institute Carbon Management Team with a particular focus on our state and regional work. And next up in this event, we're going to shift to discussing opportunities for deployment of carbon management projects and infrastructure in Louisiana, and the importance of these core federal management priorities and measures to scaling up the technology and infrastructure. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Tom Harris, who serves as the Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources and as a member of the State Mineral and Energy Board. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from Louisiana State University and a Master of Science in Environmental Toxicology from the Tulane University School of Public Health. Tom was previously the Director of the Technology Assessment Division at the Department of Natural Resources and also worked at the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality for 19 years. Louisiana has been an incredible partner, an advocate as far as carbon management and carbon capture policy is concerned, and we are thrilled that Tom is here today to share his remarks. Tom?
Thank you, Patrice. First of all, I'm very excited to be here for this opportunity to speak with you. Governor Edwards sends his regrets and apologies. As most of you know, we had a 150-mile-an-hour storm make landfall on the Louisiana coast 2 weeks ago. Right now, today, we're dealing with Tropical Storm Nicholas. While it's not a wind event, we're looking at somewhere upwards of 10 inches of rain. We still have a little over 100,000 customers without electricity and more blue roofs than I think anyone can count. So we really didn't need this right now. Governor Edwards is dealing with those issues. I do know if he were here, he was planning on expressing some thoughts on why Louisiana is poised for tremendous investment in carbon management and why we think companies want to do business in our state. Well, first of all, Governor Edwards has really been a proponent of carbon capture for a number of years. It was about 3 years ago, he joined the governor's bipartisan governor's partnership for CCUS. And more recently, he initiated a climate task force in Louisiana. And the purpose of that is to address greenhouse gas emissions and to try to bring industry, NGOs, and government together to try to work on collaborative solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We believe that we must approach climate with all entities at the table in order to move forward with solutions that protect both our environment, but also continue to support innovation and our economy. First of all, Louisiana is well positioned in terms of infrastructure, industry, geology, and policy to take a leadership position in controlling and reducing atmospheric emissions of carbon through the use of CCUS initiatives and projects. Currently, Louisiana ranks 5th in CO2 emissions, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. And it's really the makeup of our emissions that puts us in a key position for capture and deployment. Nearly 60% of Louisiana's CO2 emissions are from industrial facilities, many of which provide high purity, low cost opportunities for capture and compression. The refining and petrochemical industries have great potential for carbon capture deployment due to key existing industrial processes that produce relatively pure streams of CO2, resulting in low cost of capture, advantages of scale, and our existing expertise in the area. Our industrial base is located in close proximity both to large-scale geologic storage opportunities through injection beneath geologic confining layers with great potential for total storage, and in close proximity to other similar industrial facilities. That combines to give us a low cost of capture, a low cost of transport of the carbon to its final injection location, and opportunities for partnerships and economy of scale. We also have in Louisiana the nation's greatest density of industrial and petroleum product pipelines. This provides right-of-way and public acceptance of the infrastructure that we can use to harness the build-out of CO2 pipeline infrastructure networks to serve that industrial base. Also, Louisiana can play a major role as a pipeline hub for the transport and distribution of CO2, both as a resource for various oil and gas operations and also for carbon emitting industry from elsewhere in the United States. The state, over the last 3 years, has been taking active steps to ensure that we're prepared for carbon capture advancement. A few years ago, I asked industry leaders what we could do as a state to make Louisiana their first choice for CCUS projects. The answer I got was loud and clear. That was to reduce uncertainty and thus reduce the investment risk. And in some cases, we're talking multi-billion-dollar investment. Uncertainty in the permitting process and the time to receive a permitting decision was something that almost all of them listed, given particularly at the time we were looking at a looming commenced construction date for CCUS projects. So reducing uncertainty and increasing the transparency and predictability in the statutory and regulatory framework for carbon sequestration, I believe was huge. About 2 years ago, we looked at our statutes. Originally, legislation was passed back in 2009, setting the stage for injection and storage of CO2. We looked at that and found some places where federal law had been updated and our statutes were not current. We passed bills to rectify that situation and really put us in a better position to gain primacy from the EPA for Louisiana to take over the review and regulation of wells and proposed sequestration operations. Our Office of Conservation held a public meeting earlier this summer for their application for Class 6 well primacy. EPA is currently reviewing that application, and we're anticipating approval sometime in the spring of next year, 2022, making Louisiana just the third state after Wyoming and North Dakota to achieve regulatory primacy for the injection and sequestration of CO2 in Class 6 wells. Over the past couple of years, we've also been working with various companies in industries, and we've seen unprecedented interest in carbon sequestration projects. I know just a couple of years ago, we were optimistically hoping to attract as many as a half a dozen, but we've had 20 to 30 companies, sometime 2 to 5 a week, approaching us and asking questions and how do we do CCUS in Louisiana. We've also had 3 major projects announced with CCUS as either a primary or secondary focus. One of those is the proposed Gulf Coast sequestration project. They're creating a carbon hub in Southwest Louisiana near the busy industrial and pipeline corridor between Louisiana and Southeast Texas refineries and petrochemical complexes. That project's proposed to permanently store more than 80 million tons of carbon in deep geologic formations. The company's already begun the permitting process with EPA with a planned handoff to DNR. And they plan to sequester 2.7 million tons of CO2 annually, which they estimate will be the equivalent of removing about 600,000 passenger vehicles from the road every year, or the equivalent annual carbon avoided from 2,000 wind turbines. Another project with a CCUS element proposed for South Louisiana is Grand Fuels. It's a renewable fuels complex being considered for construction near Baton Rouge. The base project is expected to produce about 60,000 barrels per day of low carbon renewable diesel, with an option to produce renewable jet fuel utilizing non-fossil feedstocks, including soybean oil, corn oil, and animal fats. Upon the completion of all phases, potentially by 2030, the site would be one of the largest renewable fuel complexes in the world. A key aspect of the plan is the capacity to capture approximately 1 million tons per year of CO2 for sequestration. For that project, just last week, we scheduled a public hearing on the terms of the agreement between the state and the facility to sequester carbon in pore space beneath state land and water bottoms. And the third project, I'm excited about. It has not been formally announced, but late last week, we also reached agreement and scheduled a public hearing on the terms. It's a large-scale green energy facility that plans to sequester CO2 in the pore space beneath state lands and water bottoms. What we expect to be the first of many such CCUS projects to be announced over the coming years, possibly at a faster pace once Louisiana has achieved primacy on carbon injection oversight. But I think what we're really here to talk about today is the momentum at the federal level generated by three proposed bills: the SCALE Act, the Catch Act, and Access 45Q. If passed, these will not only help foster even greater interest in Louisiana and elsewhere for investment in CCUS, but I think is going to just energize the CCUS nationwide. We've heard from a lot of companies that are working hard trying to make the numbers work for investment here. These changes would include an extension of 45Q to either 5 or 10 years, providing direct pay mechanisms instead of a tax credit, and potentially increasing the value for the sequestration of CO2 from $50 to $85 a ton. I believe these are potential game changers and will position Louisiana to be a leader in storage and utilization of CO2. We've been working with our Louisiana delegation to prioritize these bills, and we really appreciate the challenging bipartisan work the Carbon Capture Coalition and the Great Plains Institute have done to help further this cause. In closing, I would like to mention that I've recently seen and was absolutely delighted with the news that Brad Crabtree is President Biden's nominee for Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy and Carbon Management at the U.S. Department of Energy. Brad's been to Louisiana a number of times. He's worked with us. He's been an invaluable resource and truly a friend. You know, having people like Brad in key leadership positions at DOE will certainly advance not only our work on CCUS, but really vitalize the program nationally. Finally, yeah, I think it's important, and when we talk to companies, it seems to give them confidence that we really want to be a leader in CCUS, to be able to demonstrate to the nation that our industries and our people are capable of transition by producing products with lower carbon footprints and advancing clean energy strategies like offshore wind, solar, and hydrogen. We want to be the hub for a multifaceted clean energy economy. Advancing CCUS and the work that this coalition is doing is a key piece of this success. And thank you all for the work you've done. Happy to be here and glad to answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Secretary Harris, for this fantastic keynote address. It's really, truly fantastic to hear how much progress and everything that's been happening in Louisiana. Excited about learning more of the not formally announced project. Great to see this unprecedented interest. Congratulations on the primacy progress. And of course, we're also really, really excited to hear about all the opportunities in the state, because I think we're ready now to move to the federal level and the discussion to really see how are we gonna make this vision that you outlined a reality for Louisiana. And of course, I will also reiterate, we're equally thrilled to see an unparalleled, thoughtful, and passionate leader like Brad Crabtree be nominated for such a leadership position. Thank you so much. And I think we're gonna move into the panel discussion. If we could bring up the panelists on the screen. And yeah, thank you so much to the audience and everyone who's here today. It's fantastic to see such a great audience and to see this conversation so well attended. My name is Lee Beck. I'm the International Director at the Clean Air Task Force. We're a global climate organization focused on next generation clean energy technologies. So let's review together. Where are we? We've heard it from Senator Lujan. The International Energy Agency has told us that late last year that it will be virtually impossible to achieve climate goals without carbon capture. This is underscoring mounting evidence from the International Panel on Climate Change and others. And we've heard already the amazing project progress in Louisiana, but really across the United States since 2018, thanks to 45Q, which was reformed in 2018, we've seen more than 45 projects announced across 12 states. And while of course this is far from the gigaton scale build out that we will need to deliver on climate ambition, to deliver on net zero pledges, it is unprecedented activity that will be invaluable for commercialization of these technologies. So since the beginning of this year, actually across the United States, we've already seen more than 10 projects being announced in a diversity of sectors with a diversity of business and infrastructure models. And this comes also at a time where other governments globally, namely mostly the Europeans, have committed billions of dollars of investment in commercializing shared CO2 transport and storage infrastructure, decarbonization hubs, and hydrogen. So again, as we've seen and as we've heard already from Senator Lujan and Secretary Harris, this private sector activity and the global interest really shows that it's really time to double down on carbon management and kickstart this industry today. We heard about certainty, predictability, and transparency. And of course, that's exactly what we're trying to do. President Biden's American Jobs Plan is in fact the largest proposed investment ever put forward by a single government into the commercialization of carbon management technologies. And as we've heard, all of this has already been translated into bipartisan bills in Congress, some of which have already passed the Senate and some of which are moving and some of which isn't. So let's take a quickly closer look before diving into the panel. We're looking at improving 45Q. Secretary Harris said we need to make the numbers work. So of course, direct pay option, an extension for multiple years. It takes 4 to 6 years on average to plan carbon management facilities, and enhanced values, $85 for power and industry, as in the Catch Act introduced by Senator Lujan, which is currently not in the package, in the reconciliation package that's moving. So that's really important to point out. It's not in there, we need it in there. And then of course, the $180 45Q for direct air capture. This is really on the facility side. If we're then going for a efficient build out of CO2 transport and storage infrastructure, where we really need to enable and connect these facilities to geologic storage. This is where the SCALE Act comes in. We've already heard it a couple of times. This piece has already passed the Senate. So as part of the bipartisan infrastructure piece, so we're really excited about this. And then of course, what we'll also hear today from, and we're really excited for our panel discussion, is DOE funding and the important impact it has on enabling facilities, particularly first of a kind facilities, and of course, planning of facilities with FEED studies. So a lot of funding, including for direct air capture, has already passed the Senate. Funding, also appropriations for the Energy Act that was passed late in 2020. So we're really excited about this additional funding for first of a kind projects for all kinds of products, particularly cement, steel, those where we don't have a lot of operating facilities yet. And then again, this is a really massive package, but it would also deliver 13-fold expansion of carbon management capacity in the mid-2030s while creating and safeguarding tens of thousands of jobs. So now we've gone over this just one more time, how everything will fit together. We're going to really dive deep into what this means for companies, what this means for jobs, and what this means for climate. So before I dive into the discussion with the panelists, though, I would like to encourage the audience to also participate in our conversation. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box to the right side at the lower panel of the Zoom window at any time during the conversation. We will work it into the conversation as we go along. And of course, we would also encourage you to tweet at us with the hashtag CO2NNECT. And then I also wanted to make sure that everyone knows this conversation is on the record and a recording will be made available after this, after the panel is over. So let me finally turn to my esteemed panel. I'm honored to be joined today by Alison Taylor, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Archer Daniels Midland Company, Bryan Glover, who is the President and CEO of Honeywell UOP, Cecile Conroy, who's the Director of Legislative Affairs at the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, Dan Lashof, who's the U.S. Director of the World Resources Institute, and of course, Ken Wagner, who's the Secretary of Energy and Environment at the state of Oklahoma. Welcome, everyone. Let's dive right in. Cecile, let's start with you. Collectively, we've heard these policies will have an incredible impact in commercializing carbon management technologies. Tell us, from your perspective, why is it good for jobs and climate?
Hi, Lee. Thank you so much for having me today. Happy to be here. Our union has been interested in the development of carbon capture for well over a decade. We come from a union that does a lot of work in the heavy energy sector, manufacturing, and also a lot of shipbuilding for the US Navy and the US Coast Guard. So we are a very complex union in terms of our membership of our unions, but everything that we do is so dependent on heavy energy. And we started attending the UN climate meetings, the COPs, I should say, probably starting back in 2008. And we quickly realized that whether it's here in the United States or even globally, the one size fits all answer is not going to work. And when we dug in more closely to carbon capture, it really mirrored a lot of the work that we had already done on the energy sector in with a lot of the other previous EPA regs, et cetera, cleaning up the air through the acid rain program, et cetera. And we just found that the technology would not only be a good match for a lot of the highly skilled trade workforce that's already out there, such as my members, the Boilermakers, but would go far in helping address those areas that are really going to be hard to decarbonize that have been spoken to earlier, particularly in the industrial sector. So we think that the intersection between the jobs and addressing climate, meeting our Paris commitments, and still providing really highly wage sustainable jobs is of real interest to us. And we're certainly gratified to see all the interest on Capitol Hill for this technology that we've seen in recent years. And we hope to keep that momentum going.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. No one size fits all. I love this because it's really about providing options for decarbonization rather than dictating pathways. And so, yeah, let's go to you, Ken. We've already heard about Louisiana and the opportunities over there. And of course, Oklahoma has been at the forefront of carbon capture and storage and has many facilities that could be great candidates for early carbon capture retrofits. Can you tell us a bit more about the state's perspective and pursuing carbon capture? Why is it good for the economy? How will deployment benefit communities, the economy, and climate, really? Oh, I think we can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself, sorry.
Sorry, I was just thinking it was great to be with so many great friends, but I do want to, issue our prayers to our friends in Louisiana. Going through 2 storms in really 2 weeks is just incredible. And Secretary Harris has been such a good friend to Oklahoma and his team there. So we're thinking about them. I think it's remarkable just how far this discussion around carbon capture, utilization, and storage has come in really such a short time. I've been involved with this for about 5 years, starting with my service at the United States Environmental Protection Agency around permitting and delegations to states like North Dakota that were really working on, starting a program under the UIC program for injection of carbon, and how far it's evolved today. And really, Oklahoma is the same way. Our initial foray into becoming interested in carbon capture, utilization, and storage was really around enhanced oil recovery. And certainly we were pleased with those opportunities that existed in the 45Q. But we've really seen that our interest in carbon capture has really progressed beyond just that. And I think you have to take a look at where we are as a state. We're a pretty unique state. Most people are, they know that we're a leader in the production of oil and gas. We're 4th in the production of oil and 3rd in the production of natural gas, but we're also in the top 5 for renewable energy. And so we get more than 40% of our power met by renewables. And so because of our unique mix, we've reduced carbon at 3 times the national average from the 2005 benchmarks in the power sector. But this harder to decarbonize sector of the industrials is really something that we have taken a hard look at and come to the same conclusion that most people come to, is that we can't do it without carbon capture. But beyond just meeting those goals, we see this robust opportunity in these lower carbon, and zero carbon commercial opportunities, and primarily hydrogen. Hydrogen sets up for such a unique opportunity when you have this great renewable resource. We've already been doing deals with people for the production of green hydrogen, or that zero carbon hydrogen, using electrolysis, using our stranded and excess renewable energy. But we're also seeing that because of our low cost natural gas and ethanes, that the feedstock is absolutely necessary to meet this $1 a kilogram price goal for clean hydrogen. And carbon capture becomes very important for that. So for us, I think hydrogen is primarily the driver that we're looking at, is because we have this great opportunity. Like Louisiana, we have this extensive pipeline network. We have workers ready-made for this type of thing. And we have both the use of natural gas as a feedstock, as well as renewable energy and great water resources. So we see it as absolutely incredibly important. And we see that the reforms or improvements to 45Q as really necessary to unlock the potential in Oklahoma. And for us, oddly, we're very different than Louisiana. We don't have that large Gulf Coast industrial corridor, and industrial emissions are not our greatest, but we certainly have lots of industrial sources. They're just separated by land and space. And so capturing carbon and moving it in a pipeline isn't as easy as it is, or cost effective as it would be in Louisiana. So for us, eliminating the annual carbon capture thresholds is key. We would have so many more projects in queue if it wasn't that 100,000 ton limit. And so finding those opportunities in that space is really, really important to us. So this conversation, the bipartisan nature of it, certainly the interactions that occur within the Carbon Capture Coalition. We are likewise proud partners of the governor's bipartisan partnership for CCUS, and supportive of the work that's being done there. And we also are building one of the only carbon direct air capture units in the country that's being currently built. It's being built in Sapulpa, Oklahoma by Gas Tech for Global Thermostat. We're thrilled about that. our low cost of energy. We are the most affordable energy in the country, 10 of the last 12 quarters. So these opportunities for direct air capture and things like that using our low cost energy are certainly great commercial opportunities for us, but we've got to be able to do something with that carbon that's off taken from that. And so thank you for the opportunity to be here, but let me also put in my plug for my good friend, Brad Crabtree. We're thrilled. Obviously, he's worked for years in a bipartisan nature and a bipartisan effort around these important topics, and Oklahoma will be very supportive of his nomination.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. Great to hear, Ken. We will dive into the topic of hydrogen in a little bit further. I think this is going to be an exciting part of the discussion. And of course, happy to hear you emphasize, yeah, there are sectors where we can't decarbonize without carbon capture. So let's move over to Bryan. So great to see you here. You or Honeywell recently joined more than 180 organizations, companies, NGOs, labor unions. This also includes ADM, which we have on the panel with Alison, and of course, Cecile with the Boilermakers, in sending a letter to Congress in support of these policy priorities and policy provisions that we've already outlined. In April, a range of your technologies also were already chosen for one of the key capture and storage facilities in the US. So can you tell us more about Honeywell's move into this space, your expectations for the market, but also how this policy package will impact carbon capture deployment and technology development?
Yeah, thank you, Lee. It's great to be here today and to have a chance to talk about this a little bit. Certainly, great discussion so far, and I think I think I'll probably be echoing things that have been said so far. As far as Honeywell UOP, we're historically a company that's focused on energy technologies, fuels, petrochemical technologies, gas processing technologies. But in that mix, over the years, we've done a lot of sustainability technologies. Actually, we're the pioneers in the area of renewable diesel fuel and sustainable aviation fuel. In fact, most of the renewable diesel in the US today is made using our process technology, and the only sustainable aviation fuel in the US is made using Honeywell UOP technology. But along the way, we've been practicing for many, many years CO2 capture technology in some refining, but in particularly our natural gas processing operations. So technologies that have been deployed globally today with the capacity to capture over 33 million tons per year of CO2. That's equivalent to the emissions of more than 7 million cars. And we're continuing to refine and improve those technologies. But the key to that, and I think we've heard this already today, is it's not a pipe dream. The technologies to be able to capture CO2 are with us today. They're readily available. And within the right incentive framework, under 45Q, especially potentially at the higher levels, around $85 a ton, they're readily deployable and could be deployed broadly into hard to decarbonize sectors, such as power generation, hydrogen generation, steel, cement. If we look broadly across the US today, there's about 1,800 power plants being fueled by natural gas and providing nearly 40% of the country's electricity. These are really critical as much as we've seen the growth of renewables, and it's been a really great thing for the country. These resources are going to be critical for us for years to come, especially as there's increased phase out of coal. And, they represent, I think, one of the very first and most interesting candidates for CO2 recovery. The technology is there. Again, the higher level of incentive that's being considered under 45Q, I think really helps to underpin this when we start to talk about natural gas power generation and the need to recover hydrogen or CO2 from flue gas. But as well in the hydrogen production area, this is an area today where significant amount of hydrogen is being produced in the US and CO2 is being released from that. That's an area of relatively concentrated CO2. that can be addressed immediately and make a difference very quickly in the short term. Readily addressable today, and certainly under the framework of 45Q, should be easily supportable. And the technologies exist. The technologies to recover that CO2 effectively, recovered in a liquid form, so it can go into a pipeline for sequestration, are available. They're operating in that application today, and could be readily deployed. So that gives us a route then to high temperature heating for industry, whether it's petrochemical industries, refining industries, steel, cement. I think the potential to produce decarbonized fuel, or largely decarbonized fuel from natural gas, and capture the CO2 is readily available today. So, we really look forward to working with an industry to bring, innovative technologies that are ready to go today, whether it's solvent capture of CO2 and combustion gases, cryogenic capture of concentrated CO2 sources like steam methane reformer, off-gas, membrane systems, and even pressure swing adsorption. It's a range of technologies that can be deployed against a range of different carbon emissions. And all of these can lead to direct capture and ultimately sequestration of CO2 today. And again, can be done quite readily. And under 45Q, especially revised provisions of 45Q, can make sense in the economy today to go out and tackle those problems.
Great, fantastic. I want to pick up on something that you said right in the beginning. It's not a pipe dream. And we're going to go to Alison now, who obviously the Decatur, Illinois project, ADM's Decatur, Illinois project has been operating for many years. So it's not a pipe dream. And there's also 12 operating facilities in the United States at this point in time. So can you, Alison, so great to have you. Can you tell us a little bit, what are some key policies that have supported the realization of this project? And then what are ADM's plans for the future?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Lee. Very good to be with you. Well, for those of you who don't know, we are have operated two CCS projects in Decatur, Illinois, adjacent to our corn processing plant there. The first one, which ran from April 2008 just until earlier this year, 2021, was developed with University of Illinois in the lead, partners, some on this webinar today, and funding from the Department of Energy. The point of that project was to demonstrate that the Mount Simon Sandstone Formation could store 1 million metric tons of CO2 over 3 years. And that was successfully demonstrated. The second project, which is also in Decatur, was started in 2017. That project is permitted to run through 2022 and to store up to 5.5 million metric tons. Together, those two projects have stored about 3.4 metric tons to date. So we do have a successful demonstration. It was exciting for us to store CO2 as a byproduct from an industrial source, and that was unique at the time that we started this. And I'd say there are three major policies that really got us interested in this back in 2008 or before, actually. There was the federal and state policy development that was happening. There was certainly federal funding that was instrumental in our ability to do this, and also the 45Q tax credit. So at the time we started this first project in Decatur, California was implementing its climate law. The US government in Washington, the Congress was debating cap and trade legislation, and the state and federal movement and interest in policy certainly got us thinking about carbon reduction and the need to move forward and to innovate as well. Working with the Department of Energy, it was very important for us to have not only the expertise of the department, we're not in the business of drilling wells, and so we certainly needed that expertise and better understanding. Also to have the funding that was available. So we utilized the DOE's Regional Carbon Sequestration Partnership Initiative for the first project. and then industrial carbon capture and storage program for the second project. And that direct federal support paired with the 45Q tax credit really gave us the incentive to see that the market and the risk could be mitigated to move forward with these kind of projects, which, as I said, have been successful demonstration. We've worked a lot with the community on education, also education for everybody about how these projects work. And we have a visitation center that has been very popular and very frequently visited by experts and students as well. So we think it's important that we're talking to people about innovation and also what can be done with this type of technology. As for our future plans, we have certainly been contacted. I was reflecting the Secretary's remarks earlier on. It seems like there certainly is a lot more interest now in carbon capture and CO2 storage. We've been contacted by a lot of regional interest looking to find a single site for storage, and we operate wells, so we've become kind of popular. Also, the development of regional CO2 pipelines and the possibility that we could be a part of that, or also we could be storing some of that CO2. I think our CEO has actually been talking about the interest in our wells and the interest in regional development of these technologies. And certainly things like the SCALE Act are helping to spur the private sector in particular to look at these technologies. And as a direct outgrowth of our CCS project and the success of that, we've also announced this year our partnership with 8 Rivers, which is to develop the NET power plant, which is one of the first net zero emissions power plants. It will also be in Decatur, utilizing our CCS wells. So it's given us the ability to test new power technologies. We'll be an off-taker of that power. And perhaps demonstrate that in other places where we have facilities as well. So very exciting developments and seemingly a tidal wave of interest as well.
Great, thank you so much, Alison. Looking forward to diving deeper into CO2 infrastructure with you in a moment. But for now, I want to go to you, Dan. We're already getting the first audience questions, and that's great. I'm encouraging everyone to submit more questions. And one is also about net zero as the target. So this is, of course, the question for you. Why are carbon management technologies really important for a net zero US? And perhaps you could also elaborate a little bit on carbon removal and how all of these come together as the carbon management economy, and what key policies you think we need, apart from what we've already mentioned, of course.
Sure, thank you very much, Lee, and it's a pleasure to be with this diverse panel and talking about this issue. WRI has studied different pathways to get to net zero emissions very carefully and looked at a variety of literatures. We don't have a specific trajectory that we think has to be the one, but what we've concluded from that is that carbon capture and sequestration is an essential technology to have available in order to meet any net zero target. And of course, net zero is essential in order to meet climate goals, to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement to keep global warming well below 2 degrees. And really, the science that's come out since Paris makes it clear that we really have to be aiming for 1.5 degrees Celsius as an upper limit, because there really is a world of difference from that half a degree of extra warming. And we've talked about the storms in Louisiana. I'm out in California, where we're seeing a second year in a row of record wildfires. Floods in New York. We're seeing the impacts of climate change now with warming of just over 1 degree. We cannot afford to allow warming to reach 1.5 degrees. So, for me, the bottom line is actually an extraordinary data set that just have been measuring continuously the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The latest data from Mauna Loa shows that it was 414 parts per million in August of this year. That's 100 parts per million higher than in the year I was born. I'm going to leave it to our audience to figure out how old I am, but you can look up the data set and figure that out pretty readily. You know, that's the bottom line. We have to prevent that continued increase in carbon dioxide concentrations and ultimately draw it down to something closer to the levels that existed before we started extracting and burning fossil fuels and clearing forests. And so, you know, we need a broad portfolio of technologies to do that. There's no question in my mind that the primary way in which we'll reduce emissions of carbon dioxide over the next decade will be by expanding wind and solar and by accelerating our transition to electric vehicles. But since we need to get to net zero, we also know that that's not enough. And that particularly if you look at the industrial sector, 22% of US emissions are from the industrial sector. Carbon capture and sequestration is an essential tool to get a handle on those emissions. Even if we weren't using any fossil fuels, for example, because cement production, which is one of the largest sources of CO2 in the world, it's about 7 or 8% of global emissions, produces carbon dioxide from the basic chemical reaction of making cement. And then you mentioned carbon removal, and we think it is going to be essential to actually remove some of the carbon dioxide that has been put into the atmosphere in the past. Nature-based solutions are part of that, and WRI strongly supports a robust strategy to halt deforestation and restore ecosystems. But land is finite, and we don't believe there's going to be enough carbon removal possible only by relying on nature-based solutions. So direct air capture technologies, hydrogen production from biomass with carbon capture as a sort of evolutionary step beyond the kinds of biomass-based with carbon capture technology that's being used from ethanol that we just heard about as a long-term strategy is another opportunity to draw down the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we think CCS is essential for that.
Great, fantastic. So I think we've gotten a really great overview of what's happening on the ground, why we need carbon capture. So let's dive a little bit deeper into why these policies, the carbon management policy package is the result of lots of dedicated analysis, translating experience on the ground into federal policy. So maybe Bryan, let's get over to you. Let's start with the enhancements of 45Q. 45Q is the most progressive carbon capture specific incentive globally. Direct pay mechanism of this tax credit and extension. Right now, the sunset date is 2026 after a 2 years extension by the Energy Act of 2020. Why are these two provisions so important from your perspective as somebody who's looking to these incentives for market creation?
Yeah, I think as we look to the market, I think two things that are key about that is, you know, one, the time to develop these projects. And so to design, develop, get them through the detailed engineering that's required and then get them implemented. I think if we want to make sure that we're able to get enough projects out there to make a difference, we need the time frame extended because the complexity, even for relatively simple carbon capture projects, the complexity of engineering that goes into them is relatively high, and it can take a number of years to actually get everything pulled together and everything on the ground in order to have things in place and up and running. I think the other thing that's important about the credits and the direct pay is if these move to direct pay, it really opens us up to a broader spectrum of project developers, right? Certainly there's a lot of either resource owners or asset owners who have the capability to manage credits today. But there's also a lot of people that are interested in working in the space, developing projects with the support of owners or developing projects independently who don't have the capacity to exploit those tax credits. So being able to go to a direct pay scheme I think really opens it up to a broader entrepreneurial spirit and a broader group of developers who are willing to take on these projects and move them forward with speed. I think that's the other thing that helps here is some of the organizations that would be able to work under a direct pay regime are also organizations that are probably able to move a little bit quicker than some other companies.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Brian. And direct pay is not just important for carbon capture tax credits, but really for all clean energy tax credits to really make sure we're unlocking investment in decarbonization as soon as possible. Maybe let's go quickly back to you, Dan. We've heard about the increases, $85, $180, $85 for industrial and power, which is right now not included in the reconciliation package, as Senator Lujan mentioned, and the increase for direct air capture at $180. Can you explain a little bit about why these are really important after the learning of what we've learned or what we know about the $50 incentive level that 45Q is at now?
Sure, thanks. So the House Ways and Means Committee draft contribution to budget reconciliation does include $180 up to $180 for direct air capture. We think that's really critical. That's in line with expected costs of early investment in that technology. And as I said, I think we will need to remove carbon from the atmosphere to meet our climate targets. And while, that's not going to be the majority or even a large part of the emission reductions we see over the next decade, the time frame that's required to scale up that industry to gigaton scale, which we will need by mid-century, means we have to start those investments now. So we see that $180 for direct air capture where the CO2 is sequestered in saline aquifers as a really critical piece, and the lower level of $130 if it's used for enhanced oil recovery. That gap makes sense given the revenues that could come from enhanced oil recovery as a scale-up approach. The other increase to $85 for industrial sources, I think is also really important because we do need to address that 22% of US emissions from industrial sources. And the current levels have definitely spurred interest, but not the scale of projects that we are really gonna need to get a handle on our emissions.
Great, fantastic. Okay, we're getting a lot of questions from the audience, so that's really fantastic. So let's shift the conversation to CO2 infrastructure and, of course, jobs. So let's start with Alison and then go to Cecile. Alison, how important is investment CO2 transport and storage, especially how it is in the SCALE Act that's already passed as part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill in the Senate? Because we're also getting a lot of questions about insights into the policymaking process and what's moving in Congress right now. And then there's more questions about Class 6 primacy as well, if you'd like to address this. And then there's been also really a lot of questions about community engagement on CO2 storage. So Alison, you've had ADM has all this experience. Please share with us.
Well, now that we've successfully proven a saline storage capacity at scale and from multiple wells, it makes perfect sense to do that more, and especially to look at that as a regional storage site for multiple regional sources. And so this is where something like the SCALE Act can be very helpful in providing more incentives, cost sharing, and education and technical assistance, particularly to the private sector. And we think there are proposals out there like the SCALE Act and the SCALE Act itself that are really spurring a lot of the interest and the kinds of phone calls that we're receiving. We participated in the DOE's Carbon Safe program, which when we were doing some of the first early feasibility studies for CO2 pipelines development. So we think those learnings could really be enhanced and scaled up with the resources and the incentives in the SCALE Act. So It's very important, and it's very important if we're going to be able to deploy capture at different facilities. There are not so many places where storage and sequestration can take place. So we think it's absolutely key. With respect to community engagement, I'm glad we have a question about that, because I think that's, from those of us who have been through the experience of drilling these wells and setting up these projects, I think it can't be overstated that community engagement is quite important. Now in Decatur, we do have a good and long-standing relationship with the community. We're a very large employer there. But nevertheless, this is something that was novel, and we certainly did get questions about the safety and the efficacy, and whether there would be, long-standing construction, or perhaps even some kind of, unstable geological activity because of drilling and injection. And so we had public meetings in order to answer all those questions. As I said, we had a lot of really credible partners that were backing us up. And could spread the word and could deploy even more education, frankly, around the state, from the University of Illinois in particular. Richland Community College houses our visitation center. And the visitation center actually has a diagram of what the carbon capture facility looks like, the drilling, the depth, the facility, et cetera. Explains for both adults and younger people how that works and why this is important. So it's climate change education as well. We're also hosting people on a fairly frequent basis to explain why we embarked on this program and the importance of it. So I think we haven't had a lot of concern or serious question about safety, and in fact, we've had a lot of support from the community, excited about this, excited to host this, and proud of this. But that certainly came from, very open discussion and a lot of willingness to ask questions and answer as well.
Great, fantastic, Alison. Thank you so much. While we're talking about communities and the real impact, Cecile, let's go to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of jobs are going to be safeguarded by carbon capture and deployment? What kind of jobs will be created? Analysis have shown us that the carbon management package could deliver tens of thousands of jobs in this new decarbonization industry. So we're really excited to hear more from you.
Well, that's the beauty of the carbon capture ecosystem relative to whether we're taking it out of the stack, or we're transporting it, or we're sinking it. The Boilermakers, along with the other trades, in fact, were heavily vested in doing Sask Power's Boundary Dam in Canada and Saskatchewan. And this is technology that we're comfortable with. We know it, we're skilled in it. Is it new? Sure, but every technology goes through that transition. But our Boilermakers come out of a 4-year apprenticeship program. It's hands-on jobs. They're used to working in the power plants. They're used to working in the refineries. They're used to working in these industrial sectors, and not just in carbon capture, but thinking about a hydrogen ecosystem that might come down the pike in the future, and we hope so. It's the same skill set that's going to be needed that already exists today. Very high skilled apprenticeship, well-trained welders like the Boilermakers, and we specialize in pressure vessel welding. So you could all see that would translate very nicely into these new types of energy propositions. So I think that it's not just preserving jobs, but it's expanding the opportunities, whether it's for a Boilermaker or another craft out there to play in that space of carbon, whether it's in transport or in the storage or at the facility. And then again, hydrogen being a large ecosystem that, you can see where that could go down the road.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think hydrogen is really a topic that we want to drill deeper into. Particular, Ken, you've mentioned it already. What are some of the key opportunities for hydrogen in Oklahoma? Since when have you been working on this, and how are you really hoping to capitalize on this momentum? Because of course, the US has an incredible advantage when it comes to producing low carbon hydrogen with carbon capture expertise and resource abundance, but it's really nascent. So how are we going to scale this with these carbon management provisions?
Well, thank you. So we've been working on hydrogen for about 2 years, and our legislature this last session passed the Hydrogen Infrastructure and Pipeline Task Force, which we have been tasked in a 6-month period to deliver a report to our governor and legislature on regulatory hurdles, incentives we need, how to tax hydrogen, as well as what are the opportunities and challenges that exist. So we have taken a dive kind of with both feet and into the deep end on hydrogen, and it really checks so many boxes for Oklahoma. One of the primaries, backing up what Cecile says, is our workforce. We obviously have hundreds of thousands of jobs in the oil and gas sector as transition with anything, finding work that fits those skills, and they're pipelining, they're how to use pore space for injection control wells, which is important in the carbon capture discussion, as well as storing hydrogen. We are the crossroads of America from an interstate standpoint, with 3 of the largest interstates and a 4th to be named in this infrastructure bill. So we've got that, and we're the pipeline crossroads of America for that. So opportunities are great. I think one of them, following up on the idea of transportation being a sector that's very hard to decarbonize, I fully believe that hydrogen will play the strongest part in decarbonizing over-the-road semi-trucking and movement of freight, as well as heavy port industries and things like that. Most people don't understand that Oklahoma has the furthest inland seaport. You can get all the way to the Gulf of Mexico from Catoosa, Oklahoma, which is Tulsa. So we are invested on many different areas. But if you think about renewables, here we are with nearly 50% renewable energy on our grid. But it does one thing right now, and that's put power on the grid. And we need to figure out how we can fire up some of these high energy or heat transfer industries, like steelmaking, like refining, like fertilizer making, and ethane cracking. The natural gas liquids industries. I think hydrogen will play a strong role in that as well. And so we are really looking at it as a multi-phased. As well as a good and low carbon use for our abundant, cheap natural gas. And I know, there was a question about Class 6 primacy, and I've worked on that extensively. And I would just take a moment to emphasize the importance of permitting and resources that EPA needs. And again, I coordinated all 10 US EPA regions, and these programs, these UIC programs, are not heavily staffed. They rely on each other. So in other words, Region 6 in Dallas will consult with Region 5 in Chicago on a project that may exist in Illinois, or likewise. And so Secretary Harris and Jason Lonclo, who is his state energy director, and I have met with Congress and met with EPA many times about how can we as states really help you provide those resources and expertise to supplant your expertise. When you think about, I hear the excitement about the ADM project, but really they're the only ones that have truly injected on a permit in the country. And so most people don't realize we're talking about a universe of 6 permits. And so there's going to be heavy scrutiny of all of these permits. And so states giving and assisting with the EPA and their resources for modeling and all of this extensive work that needs to be done to map these subsurface storage opportunities is of utmost importance. And I'm a regulatory guy, so I just want to put that plug in for people and industry and states to recognize that we've got to support EPA in order that they won't be so overwhelmed by this influx of projects that is spurred by this low carbon push, net zero push, and these incentives, these wonderful incentives that the Carbon Capture Coalition has worked so hard for. So those are really the biggest roadblocks that I see, is how do we get the permits to allow carbon capture in a timely manner? State delegation is great, but I think work agreements in the interim is going to be important. If you recall, North Dakota took 6 years to get their primacy application fully done, and Wyoming's was not quite as long, but they're picking up steam, but they still take a great deal of time. So we want to support government and support those regulatory agencies so they can have the resources.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And in fact, there were a couple of audience questions about this topic already. So thanks for addressing this, Ken. And as you mentioned, last year, I think in a congressional hearing, it was mentioned that there's only half a staff person working at EPA on processing some of these permits. So it's really, really important that as part of the SCALE Act, we're getting funding, funding authorized for additional staff members, and also for additional Class 6 primacy, as Secretary Harris mentioned already. But Dan, I want to go to you. You've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on the hydrogen topic. We do see hydrogen as playing a really critical role in achieving a net zero economy. I think it's still perhaps debatable what role it'll play in the transportation sector versus batteries, but in the industrial sector for high temperature heat and potentially in the power sector as a dispatchable zero carbon source of electricity, it could play a role there. Again, there's other options like the net zero power plant that we heard about, which is exciting. So we need options, and we can't afford to take any tools off the table. But hydrogen is one really important element. The House bill from Ways and Means includes a very strong $3 per kilogram maximum tax credit for clean hydrogen, which I think is a really positive performance-based incentive that would be great, and so we can make hydrogen in a lot of different ways, which is one of the advantages of it. And as I mentioned before, I'm particularly excited about the opportunity to make actually negative emission hydrogen using waste biomass and capturing the CO2 and sequestering that. So that could play a really significant role in helping to draw down CO2 from the atmosphere.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much for jumping in on this hydrogen topic, which we at Clean Air Task Force are really excited is getting more and more traction in the US. So I think we've heard a lot about how these incentives could potentially help us overcome some barriers. And I'd love to invite Alison, you and Bryan into some of this discussion because I think we need to analyze a little bit more what are the barriers on the ground and how are we going to overcome them with these incentives and these policies.
Okay, well, maybe I'll jump in. I think Alison and ADM have already gotten past some of these barriers within their organization. I think as we talk to customers, potential customers, I think right now there's a number of barriers. One is essentially the cost of implementation, and certainly 45Q in any form, but hopefully in an enhanced form, can really help out there. Because I think, as we look at projects today, we're really $10, $20, $30 a metric ton away from having a modest number of projects that could go forward to having a very large number of projects that could go forward today. So today there's a fair amount of CO2 that's captured or could readily be captured in the course of refining and petrochemical production, ammonia production, ethanol production. And I think the 45Q in its current form supports those, with the exception in some cases of the lower limit, the 100,000 ton limit. So I think even in refining applications, there's some amounts of CO2 that are captured today as part of just normal operations that could be devoted to sequestration if the credit can be adjusted so that it supports the modest amount of infrastructure that's required to now get that into a pipeline where it can go either into sequestration directly or part of enhanced oil recovery. So I think that makes a big difference. And I think the other thing that really needs to develop, and it's, I think what ADM took on themselves, is the actual sequestration or the transport and sequestration. And I think Secretary Harris talked about that quite a bit at the beginning and what they're trying to do in Louisiana. I think certainly in states like Louisiana and Oklahoma, where there's active participation in government to support the infrastructure that's needed, the capture of the CO2 is relatively straightforward. Increasing the 45Q credit can help go beyond, as I say, right now, things like, acid gas removal, ethanol, ammonia, capturing CO2 off hydrogen. I think those can all be done under the current credit scheme, but the credit doesn't have to get a whole lot bigger, and carbon capture from large combustion sources could start to become viable. The next question is really how to get it into a source of transportation and then ultimately sequestration. So I think the more particularly the government can do at the state level and the federal level to support those projects and to support the infrastructure to be able to move the CO2 from the sites where it's captured to sites where it can be sequestered. I think that's maybe the next big challenge that can make projects go forward, because I think getting the infrastructure on place on a given site in order to capture CO2, that's pretty straightforward today. But when we see people talking about these projects, the next hurdle then is, okay, how do I get it? How do I get it into some advanced sequestration? Or if I'm not already close to a pipeline, how do I get to a pipeline where it can go into either existing enhanced oil recovery or some saline aquifer sequestration or something like that?
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. And we were fortunate to be located right next to or on top of a big saline aquifer, and not everybody is. So certainly that transportation piece is key, and that's where the SCALE Act really provides some good assistance. Even though we're on top of the aquifer, the permitting process is certainly one that we have identified through the SCALE Act in particular, needs enhancement and streamlining, as so many have said already. That's going to be terribly important to be able to develop projects fast enough, and for investors to be able to know that they'll get a return on their investment and the project's going to go forward in a timely way. I also think that their standards, I know there was a question about the low carbon fuel standard, incorporating recognition of CCS into those standards could make a difference as well for incentives for companies to move in that direction. I'll also say, with respect to sustainable agriculture, which we work a lot in and with a lot of farmers to use their land wisely to even sequester carbon in their soils. Recognition by certain standards and regulators of those practices and the quantification of those practices would spur a lot of this interest in developing these technologies to go along with a sustainable supply chain.
Great, fantastic. Does anyone have anything to add to this question's key barriers? Or do we have it covered? I think we have it covered. Okay, so let's go back to you, Dan. I actually have another question for you, which I wanted to address earlier, but what benefits does carbon capture deployment have for communities? We already talked about jobs with Cecile, but how can we maximize the benefits for communities, ensure that there is cumulative emissions reductions and also pollution reductions?
Yeah, and I think that is a key question, and certainly community engagement throughout the process of developing projects is absolutely essential. And I think it's an area that needs to be studied really on a case-by-case basis. So I'm not sure there's a blanket answer. It's always a challenge because you have to consider what is the impact on the community relative to what, and you don't know what that alternative is. I mean, from a pollution point of view, facility may reduce emissions more. And some communities really are focused on that. But then, of course, you're also losing the jobs from that facility. But if you think about something like a cement kiln, where there are some local emissions, if you were to retrofit such a facility with carbon capture, you would not only reduce the carbon emissions, you would preserve those jobs. And because you need to clean up the emission sources in order to capture CO2, you would also be reducing other pollutants of concern in that community. So I think there is a potential enhanced benefit there. But again, it really does need to be studied on a case-by-case basis with communities involved.
Great, fantastic. Okay, well, we have covered so much ground, but I do want to do a little lightning round with this panel here. In, I would say, a couple words or more, not more than a sentence, what is your favorite carbon or most interesting carbon capture, carbon management project out there? What is your favorite policy or trend? What should people be watching as we're going into as they're turning off, I guess, from this panel and following the sector more closely? Nobody wants to go first. I'm going to nominate Ken. Okay, go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say I would go first. I think, I think to me, I think it's hydrogen. If I look broadly at the opportunity today to make significant impact for moderate cost, going after carbon capture around hydrogen production today from natural gas is probably one of the most impactful things that we could do in the short term.
Well, since you were going to nominate me, I would agree with Dan on. I would agree with him on the hydrogen portion of that. The flexibility of that it can touch all three sectors: the power sector, the industrial sector, and the transportation sector. To see that a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle can travel 950 miles between fuelings versus a battery EV truck of 250. The amount of infrastructure is much less. So we see that as a great opportunity.
I would say I really appreciate Dan's remarks about, looking into so many diverse possibilities and considering a wide variety of possibilities. As a large thermal energy user, this is certainly something that our company has been doing and needs to do. Hydrogen shows great promise, and also watch our net power project. We're very excited about that.
Lee, I guess I'm going to be preaching to the choir here. I would say that yes, we are all of the above in our organization, but the prospects of hydrogen are really have us excited. So I would agree with all those comments about those potentials wholeheartedly.
Well, I'll jump in with a policy that's been mentioned, but just really want to highlight California's low carbon fuel standard, which I think is a really innovative policy that is driving a lot of interest in both direct air capture and carbon capture and sequestration in other applications, because it's performance-based and because it has a very high value in terms of dollars per ton of CO2 avoided. And so I know there was one question about should we have a national low carbon fuel standard. It is something that many other states are starting to look at. Oregon has recently adopted something, but other states are considering it and would love to get to a federal version of that kind of policy. It's not on the table right now in reconciliation or in the bipartisan budget, but maybe as the next step.
All right. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we're seeing Jesse Stolark already on the screen here. So I'm going to close the panel with a little summary. So I think it has become very clear. Carbon capture, as you, Bryan, said, is not a pipe dream. And there is also unprecedented interest from state governments, from companies, from organizations, unions, to deploy this technology. As we heard from Secretary Harris, Louisiana is hearing from 2 to 5 companies a week who are interested in doing projects. Soon we're going to learn about an additional project being announced in Louisiana. And what I really enjoyed about this panel was really the amount of opportunity and ground that we covered with what kind of diverse opportunities we're seeing. We're hearing from Cecile about preserving jobs, creating new jobs, safeguarding jobs with establishing really important skills. We heard from Ken and Dan about the hydrogen economy, really to make the U.S. the heart of a low carbon manufacturing hub. We're also hearing about the cross-sector opportunities of decarbonization with carbon capture. This includes power sector, really enabling us to achieve 2035 full power sector decarbonization and being a complement to other technologies. We heard about carbon removal as an opportunity to draw down the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere. So this is really an exciting picture of tomorrow's carbon management economy. And so how do we make this reality? And that is by passing this policy package that is on the table. Just to reiterate, 45Q enhancements, an extension of 45Q to accommodate the long project deployment timelines, increase of values, $85, $180. The $85 piece is not in any package moving right now. So please, when you're reaching out, and if you want to reach out to your senator or representative, please do mention this. And then of course, as well, the direct pay mechanism for all clean energy technologies. Finally, the SCALE Act for CO2 infrastructure, commercialization and efficient build out for CO2 infrastructure, and then funding for DOE, as we've heard from Alison, has really made the difference in early project deployment with the Decatur, Illinois, and will do so for many other applications, because of course, what we also heard is carbon capture isn't a one size fits all application. It enables us to decarbonize many different power sector applications, industrial sector applications, carbon removal. So we really want to make sure that the carbon management package goes through in Congress. If you want to take action, please check out the Carbon Capture Coalition's website or the Cleaner Task Force's website. And also reach out to Jesse Stolar, who's going to close the session for us, as well as reach out to your senators and your representatives in support of this package. Thank you so much. It was an honor to be here today, and we're looking forward to the next Connect event soon. Over to you, Jesse.
Thanks, Lee. And I'm really hoping we'll do one of these in person someday. That was a great lightning round summary. So I want to thank you and our panelists for the great discussion. I also want to thank Senator Lujan and Secretary Harris for joining us today. I think that I could summarize today's discussion with one word, which is momentum. And so it's clear that momentum for carbon management is increasing, and it's also clear that we have a critical opportunity before us in the current Congress. And it's perhaps not overstating to say it's a once in a generational opportunity. Enacting the portfolio of legislation discussed today, including the Catch Act, the SCALE Act, and Access 45Q, will move this technology forward in all the ways Lee's just mentioned to create high-paying jobs, harness existing workforces, address climate change, and get us on the road to net zero emissions. So with that, I will say goodbye with one final housekeeping note. My colleagues from the Great Plains Institute will be sharing a recording of today's event in the coming days. You can keep an eye on your inbox for that. And finally, I wanted to thank you, our audience, for joining us today and sticking with us. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thanks.